Weylan Stroud stood at the center of the Xenocultural Exchange Hall, trying not to squint under the blue overhead lights that seemed calibrated specifically to irritate human eyes. The ceiling was too low, the plants too purple, and the air smelled faintly of warm rubber. A row of alien students watched him from tiered seats, their oddly shaped heads angled in what he hoped was curiosity and not disgust. Professor Zern tapped a claw on the podium. "Today we explore human pain thresholds," he announced. "Our volunteer, Weylan of Earth, has given consent to participate in a physical demonstration of species-specific injury tolerances." "I said I'd help with a cultural demo," Weylan muttered, "not get mauled." "You said sure. I'm open to learning," Zern replied. "That was before you rolled out the surgical trays." Zern gestured to the students. "Observe his reluctance. This is typical. They are fragile yet stubborn." A student with translucent skin raised his limb. "Are we allowed to sedate him?" "No," Zern said. "Our aim is to witness real-time response." "Begin the graded impact test." Weylan eyed the padded stool in the center. "What's the graded impact test?" Zern gave no answer. Instead, a large, barrel-bodied student stepped forward, its limbs ending in dense, rubbery pads. It looked like a cross between a sea lion and a jackhammer. "Name's Vurlox," it said. "I'll start at level 1. Tell me when to stop." Before Weylan could respond, Vurlox's arm came down gently on his shoulder. It was firm but manageable. "That's fine. Level 2. Another thud. He grunted. 3. "Hang on," Weylan said. "Is this supposed to escalate like?" 4. The hit landed just below his clavicle. Something shifted sharply under the skin. He stumbled back, gasping. "Okay, stop." But Vurlox had already raised its arm again. The 5th strike came down on Weylan's upper chest, and a crack echoed through the hall. He dropped to one knee, clutching the spot. "Stop," Zern barked. "Medical." The students hurried forward. One brought a scanner the size of a toaster. Another pulled out a silvery splint device. "Fracture detected," the scanner chirped. "Sternal region. Non-displaced." Weylan's breathing came in short bursts. Got any ice?" The room went silent. Zern looked genuinely confused. "Ice?" "Yeah," Weylan said, voice tight. "Frozen water. For swelling." "You require sub-zero hydration?" "No, I require cold compress. To reduce inflammation." He winced as one of the students tried to straighten his posture. Vurlox backed away, visibly shaken. "I thought your chest structure was reinforced." "It's got bone, not armor." Weylan groaned. "You hit like a wrecking ball." A student muttered. He should have passed out. "I'm still here," Weylan said, teeth clenched. "But barely." They moved him to the infirmary, which resembled a dentist's office designed by someone who had never seen teeth. The bed was too short, and the pillows were filled with something that hissed when compressed. Dr. Salek, a long-limbed physician with eyes that rotated independently, ran a full scan. "You will require 6 weeks minimum to heal. I recommend immobilization and nutrient gel infusions. I recommend you don't let Vurlox near anyone's ribs again." Dr. Salek handed him a semi-rigid brace. "You may wear this. It will assist with posture and prevent further injury. You must also refrain from lifting, twisting, running, or sneezing." No sneezing. The shock could misalign the fracture. Weylan laid back, slowly. "This is what I get for volunteering." 2 days later, he was still confined to the infirmary. Alien students visited in small groups, each more fascinated than the last. "You didn't lose consciousness," said a pink-skinned girl named Ritha. "How?" "Pain doesn't always knock you out," Weylan replied, sipping a cup of lukewarm broth. "Sometimes it just parks in your chest and dares you to breathe." Ritha took notes furiously. "Do you all endure pain like this?" "No. Some people faint from paper cuts. Others walk on broken legs. It's not uniform." Vurlox visited last. He stood in the doorway, massive arms folded. "I reviewed the footage. I overdid it." "Yeah," Weylan said, "but it wasn't malicious. I assumed your tolerance was closer to ours." "It's not, but I get why you'd think that." Vurlox stepped closer. "Why didn't you scream?" "I was too busy trying to stay conscious." There was a beat of silence. Then Vurlox asked, "Would you allow me to assist in your recovery?" Weylan raised an eyebrow. "You mean like a nurse?" "I will carry your meals and monitor your progress. I owe you a debt." Weylan thought for a moment. "Fine, but no lifting me, and definitely no more tests." Over the next week, Vurlox proved surprisingly attentive. He mastered the human food warmer, adjusted Weylan's brace every morning, and even learned how to stream old Earth sitcoms for entertainment. You find this humorous? Vurlox asked during a rerun of The Office. Absolutely, Weylan said, chuckling carefully. Look at him. He's trying to avoid doing any real work. But he is employed. That's the joke. By the second week, Weylan could sit up without wincing. The swelling had gone down, and he was cleared for short walks, slow, careful ones around the infirmary wing. One afternoon, Ritha and 2 other students approached him with a clipboard. We're designing a revised curriculum, she said. One that accounts for interspecies vulnerabilities. Would you review it? Weylan glanced over the pages. You listed human sternum under high-risk zones. Good start. We also removed graded impact test as a demonstration. Fantastic. The next day, Zern himself arrived. I owe you an apology, he said. Your reaction has sparked a valuable dialogue about ethical boundaries. Glad my ribs were educational. Zern held out a small container. Inside were several cubes of actual ice. A belated gesture. Weylan smiled. Thanks. I'll use it on my pride. By the end of the month, Weylan was back on his feet. His chest still ached in the mornings, and he had to sleep propped up, but he was walking, joking, and even attending classes again. The alien students treated him with a mix of awe and caution, as though he were both legend and liability. You're the one who took a level 5 impact and asked for ice, said a student from the aquatic sector. We study that clip in trauma awareness now. Weylan nodded. Just don't make it a sport. As he left the hall that day, Vurlox caught up to him. I have completed a report on the incident. It concludes with your statement. Got any ice? Weylan laughed, wincing slightly. Of course it does. The incident was never repeated, but it became something of a rite of passage for new students to watch the footage and marvel at the resilience of a creature whose bones could snap like twigs, yet who stayed awake long enough to ask for something cold. 3 weeks after this sternal catastrophe, as the campus forums had dubbed it, Weylan was pulled into a new elective module titled Emergency Field Protocols and Multi-Species Scenarios. He hadn't signed up. The system had simply updated his schedule, slotted it in between xenoethics and shared ecosystems, and diplomatic syntax for polyvocal species, and sent a cheery notification. Congratulations. You've been selected for active scenario integration. He walked into the training dome with a dull ache still lingering beneath his sternum brace. The dome's walls shifted color constantly, recalibrating the interior climate to match random planetary environments. Currently, it was simulating a high-gravity tundra. Weylan's boots crunched over frost-laced gravel that wasn't there 10 minutes ago. A tall, segmented instructor named Threll stood at the center, adjusting a series of blinking pylons. Each time Threll moved, his midsection spiraled like a mechanical corkscrew, which made it impossible to tell if he was facing the group or merely spinning out of habit. You will be dropped into a rotation of response simulations, Threll announced. Each will contain unpredictable variables. There are no correct outcomes, only survivable ones. A student with bioluminescent fins raised a hand. Are we being evaluated on speed or creativity? Both. And also on whether any of you are directly responsible for your team's demise. Weylan shifted his weight, already regretting not faking a migraine. Without warning, the floor beneath him buckled. He and 5 others dropped through a narrow shaft into a separate chamber, landing hard on a springy surface that hissed like compressed air. Artificial snow burst into the air around them. A siren blared. A voice boomed. Scenario: crash supply transport. Atmospheric breach imminent. Survivor count: 6. Oxygen decay: rapid. The others scattered instantly, shouting over each other in at least 4 languages. Weylan pulled himself upright and scanned the chamber. A mock fuselage lay cracked in the center, smoke pouring from one side. A crate labeled life support had landed upside down. He sprinted toward it and flipped the crate. The lock was jammed, so he grabbed a shard of the broken fuselage and levered it under the latch. It snapped open with a satisfying crack, revealing oxygen masks and thermal packs. Over here, he yelled, tossing gear. A student with a gliding membrane caught one and secured it over her mouth. How did you know it was jammed? She asked. Because I've opened a lot of stuck toolboxes with butter knives. Within 6 minutes, they had stabilized the mock survivors and sealed the breach using a thermal foam canister one of the others located under a seat panel. When the lights cut out and pulsed green, Threll descended from the ceiling on a harness, apparently amused. Group Gamma survived in record time. Human utilized improvised leverage. Noted. Back in the main dome, Weylan sat down on a bench, exhaling slowly. The adrenaline had made him forget the ache in his ribs until he tried to twist sideways and felt a hot string of pain flash across his chest. A med drone zipped over, scanned him, and emitted a disapproving chirp. Still healing, Weylan muttered. Yeah, I know. The drone sprayed a local analgesic mist over his sternum and hovered nearby, as if daring him to move again. Later that evening, Vurlox found him in the mess pod, poking at a bowl of starch noodles with one hand while massaging his side with the other. I heard about your simulation, Vurlox said, setting down a tray stacked with nutrient blocks. You forced to open a sealed container? Wasn't sealed. Just stuck. You used debris as a tool? Yeah, it's a habit. Vurlox chewed slowly. Do humans typically repurpose wreckage mid-emergency? Only if we want to live through it. The table next to them erupted in laughter as a student from the aquatic sector described how his team had attempted to weld a hull breach using a heating coil and a sandwich wrapper. Weylan shook his head. They keep trying to plan for ideal conditions, he said. But nothing ever breaks politely. 2 days later, the simulation dome was converted into a hazard response maze. This time, teams were blindfolded and instructed to navigate using only verbal cues from one designated anchor. The other students chose telepaths or echolocation specialists. Weylan's group picked him. You're familiar with chaotic navigation, one of them explained. You mean I look like I've wandered out of a bar at 2 a.m.? I don't understand the reference, but yes. The maze was dimly lit, full of shifting walls and sudden drops. Weylan stood on a raised platform, watching his teammates stumble forward, guided only by his voice. Left. No, not that left. The other left. Look, just put your hand on the wall and follow the pipe until it ends. Then duck. A student collided with a low beam and swore in a dialect that sounded like coughing underwater. I said duck. You said it too late. I said it exactly when you needed it. Despite near misses and one minor concussion, they reached the extraction point with only one member needing to be carried. Threll met them at the end, nodding once. Humans' verbal guidance effective, despite erratic idioms. Later that week, Weylan was approached by an advisor from the Interspecies Emergency Response Program. We're assembling a cross-species rapid response contingent, she said. You're being considered as a human representative. Weylan choked slightly on his drink. I'm still healing from the last time I volunteered for something. This is observational. No direct contact. You just shadow existing response teams. Until something explodes and someone gets speared through the leg. Which is exactly why we want you there. He agreed, out of a mix of curiosity and what he later admitted was mild masochism. The first assignment took place on a jungle moon where a research outpost had been flooded by aggressive flora. The plants weren't sentient, just fast-growing and chemically unkind. The team landed in a clearing already half overrun with vine growth. One technician had been trapped inside a collapsed storage unit for over 12 hours. The locals had attempted to dissolve the vines with solvent, which had only made them grow faster. Weylan examined a sample of the vine and sniffed the air. Smells like nitrates, he said. You used something ammonium-based? One of the field agents nodded. Standard protocol. In this place? You basically fed them fertilizer. He rummaged through their toolkit, found a small canister of carbon dioxide pellets, and dumped it directly onto the root system. The vine recoiled instantly, curling away like it had been burned. Starve the root of oxygen, he said. They'll shrink back, or at least slow down. The technician was pulled out 20 minutes later, dazed but intact. Back aboard the transport vessel, a medic with compound eyes approached Weylan, holding a tablet. You're not trained in xenobotany. No. Then how did you know the reaction? I had a mold problem in my bathroom last year. Same smell. She stared at him for a long moment. You solved a planetary infestation with bathroom mold experience. Yeah. I also fixed a hoverbike with a coat hanger once. The report filed afterward listed his contribution under unorthodox human interventions, a category that, according to the advisor, hadn't existed until that week. By the time the third assignment rolled around, this one involving a gravity anomaly and a missing geological team, Weylan had begun keeping a journal. Not for reflection, but to track which household mishaps might one day save an alien life. He sat one night under an artificial skylight, scribbling in the margins. Today, I used a broken umbrella frame to stabilize a collapsing scaffold. Reminded me of that time the laundry rack broke and I used a broom handle to keep it upright. Might be worth testing if brooms work in zero gravity. As he closed the journal, Vurlox entered, holding a new data pad. I compiled a list of human improvisation patterns, Vurlox said. They are difficult to categorize because we don't really follow patterns. You repurpose objects based on vague associations and previous inconveniences. Exactly. You fight chaos with chaos. Vurlox nodded slowly. It's unsettling and deeply effective. Weylan leaned back, the ache in his chest finally fading to the background. Welcome to Earth Logic. It was late afternoon when Weylan arrived at the Incident Simulation Annex for what was promised to be his final evaluation. The annex towered like a cracked seashell at the edge of campus, its outer surface constantly shifting in texture to mimic variable planetary crusts. Today, it had the dusty orange shimmer of Martian regolith, though the inside was far more clinical, rows of segmented walls, ceiling-mounted drones, and sensor arrays blinking like bored traffic lights. He adjusted the wrap around his ribcage one last time in the prep bay. The brace had come off 2 days prior, but there was still a residual tightness when he turned too fast or stretched past shoulder height. A technician with an elongated neck and fingers like bundled reeds handed him a slim transceiver. Emergency relay, localized, the technician said. Only functions inside the zone. Your team lead. No remote assistance. Weylan clipped it to his collar. Define emergency. You'll know when it starts. A pneumatic hiss sent the wall behind him sliding open, revealing a corridor lined with translucent panels. He stepped through, and the simulation began. The lights dimmed. A synthesized voice announced, Scenario, Orbital Ferry Crash. Structural instability. Human, you are the ranking responder. He squinted through the artificial smoke. The room had been transformed into the bowels of a transport shuttle, complete with sparking conduits and debris scattered like angry furniture. A dozen humanoid figures groaned, some pinned under collapsed walls, others slumped beside flickering consoles. Vitals on subject 17 dropping, the voice added. Structural collapse in 7 minutes. He moved fast, calling out, if you're conscious and mobile, start dragging others toward the rear exit. If not, yell, or make noise. Just do something. A low moan came from a corner where a support beam had folded into AV, pinning a student with gray-blue skin. Weylan grabbed the nearest splintered rail and wedged it under the beam, using his full weight to lever it upward. The metal shrieked, but didn't give. Hey, he called, can you shift your leg at all? The student tried. A crunch followed. Stop. That's bone. He didn't hesitate. He jammed the beam higher using a twisted seat frame for leverage. The moment there was space, he slid in sideways and yanked the student out sideways by the arms. As soon as they were clear, a panel above them buckled and dropped a cascade of insulation foam. Structural collapse in 5 minutes. Another student was crawling toward a motionless form near the cockpit. Weylan sprinted over, or as close to a sprint as he could manage without setting off his ribs, and helped roll the unconscious figure onto his back. No visible trauma, Weylan muttered. Hey, you breathing? No chest movement. He checked the airway, felt for breath. Nothing. All right. CPR it is. He knelt and tilted the head back. 1 breath. 2. Compressions. He counted aloud, the rhythm steady. 1, 2, 3, 4. At 30, he gave another 2 breaths. The chest rose weakly. Come on, come on. The student suddenly gasped, eyes wide, flailing. You're all right. Weylan barked. Stay still. A drone zipped overhead, scanning vitals. Pulse re-established. Subject stable. Structural collapse in 3 minutes. He hauled the student up and shouted for assistance. 2 others grabbed the revived student and started toward the rear hatch. Weylan turned to locate the last 2 signals. One was buried beneath what looked like a ruptured coolant tank. The other was inside a service crawlspace, barely visible through a half-melted hatch window. He went for the crawlspace first. The hatch was jammed. He wedged his fingers into the seam and pulled. Nothing. He tried again, this time using a broken oxygen tank as a makeshift wedge. As he yanked, pain flared across his chest like a re-torn seam. Don't care, he muttered, wrenching it open. Inside was a student with gills pressed flat against the wall, dazed but breathing. You with me? A nod. Crawl. Now. They slid out together just as the coolant tank began to hiss louder. He turned to the final figure and realized the tank itself was too heavy to move. Hey, he yelled. Are you conscious? A weak groan. Okay. I'm not lifting this. But I can stabilize it. He scoured the floor for something to use. All he found was a metal strut with a sheared end. He jammed it under the tank edge, then wedged a broken console casing beneath it to form a makeshift tripod. That done, he slid in sideways, heart pounding. Try to move your right leg, he said. The trapped student did, then cried out. All right, I'm pulling. This'll hurt. He dragged them out inch by inch, teeth clenched against the pain in his own chest. As they cleared the tank, the strut buckled and the whole thing dropped with a concussive clang. Evacuation complete, the voice said. Simulation terminated. The lights returned to full brightness. The smoke vanished. The debris retracted into the floor. Weylan dropped to one knee, breathing hard. A moment later, Threll entered from a side door, followed by 3 instructors and a medic. The medic scanned Weylan silently. You've re-aggravated the fracture, she said. Minor displacement. No collapse. I'll live. Threll tilted his head. You ignored the injury warning 3 times. People were dying. The medic handed him a cold compress. Hold this against your sternum. That's about all I can offer unless you want another brace. He pressed the pack in place and winced. The instructors conferred briefly before one of them, a short, feathered Xeno with eyes like polished stone, approached him. Your tactics were unconventional. You should have requested team assistance rather than attempt solo extractions. I didn't have time. They were panicking. You also used a damaged tank to jack up a coolant drum. That's not protocol. No, that's desperation. There was a pause. Then the feathered instructor said, You passed. Barely, added another, taller one with a ridged spine. Barely still counts, Weylan said, adjusting the compress. Later that evening, just past dinner time, he sat on the terrace outside the dorm cluster, legs propped on the railing. The stars overhead blinked in unfamiliar constellations. He sipped from a metal cup filled with something approximating broth but with a hint of citrus. Vurlox arrived without announcement, carrying a folded data sheet. They published your evaluation. You scored highest in adaptive prioritization. Sounds fancy. They also said you were the only one to re-break an injury mid-simulation and keep going. I'm trying not to make that a habit. Vurlox unfolded the sheet. They've offered you a spot on the permanent interspecies response team. You'd be the human liaison. Weylan blinked. Seriously? It's unpaid. Of course it is. But it comes with access to any scenario training module you want. And you get a jacket. Weylan laughed, only slightly wincing. All right, I'll take the jacket. Vurlox sat beside him, silent for a moment, then said, I still don't understand how you knew to use a pressurized tank as a support beam. I didn't, Weylan replied. I just knew it would hold long enough. That's not certainty. No. It's experience. They sat in quiet for a while, watching a slow-moving satellite blink across the sky. As the artificial moonlight bathed the terrace, Weylan leaned back, the ache in his chest fading into the background again. Think they'll ever stop being confused by us? He asked. No, Vurlox said. And I hope they never do.